In today's video, you'll learn about 4 different types of wood chisels so that you'll be clear on what each one does and why it does it so well. First up is the most common and most widely used chisel, and that's the bench chisel. It gets its name because it's often found sitting on the workbench because it gets used so much. Bench chisels have a 25-degree primary angle on the blade, and they do come in a few different options. The first option, and maybe the most common, is the beveled edge chisel like this one here. If you look close at the edge of this chisel, you can see that the edge is beveled and not 90 degrees to the top. This particular bench chisel has a fine edge bevel, meaning that the bevel goes almost all the way down, creating a very small 90-degree edge. However, if we look at this other beveled edge chisel, you can see that the bevel or relief angle doesn't go as far, and it leaves a wider 90-degree edge. One of the reasons why people generally prefer a bevel edge is because it makes it possible to fit into tight corners like that produced when cutting a dovetail. The second option is what's called a firmer chisel. I don't have a firmer bench chisel in the shop, but the edge would be square or 90 degrees, similar to this one here. Bench chisels can do almost any task, and they're great for both chopping and paring. And if you're not familiar with those terms, chopping is when you remove large amounts of material at a time, and you would generally be using a mallet for this task. Paring is when you remove thin layers of material. While using just the strength of your hand, there's no need for a mallet here. Paring is used often when you're at your final stages of fitting a joint and you just need to remove a little bit of material to get the joint to fit perfectly. Again, bench chisels are great for both chopping and paring. That's why some people think that there's no need for any other type of chisel. Next is the Mortise Chisel. At first glance, you can see that it has a 90-degree edge, and the steel is much thicker and more robust. On closer inspection, this Mortise Chisel has a 30-degree primary bevel. What this does is gives the leading edge of the chisel a little more strength. Look at it this way: the steeper the angle, the stronger the edge. The shallower the angle, the weaker the edge. And you'll see an example of this when we get to the paring chisel. The Mortise Chisel is designed to chop mortises, which require a lot of force, so that edge needs to be strong. The combination of a thicker, more robust steel, a steeper bevel, and a slightly longer overall length makes the Mortise Chisel the perfect design for handling this work. The next chisel is a paring chisel, and the one I have here is a custom chisel that has a primary bevel of 17 degrees, which means that the edge is very fragile, but it does a fantastic job at paring end grain in softwoods. Again, paring chisels are designed to be used mostly by hand to push them through the work, unlike using a mallet for the other chisels. Paring chisels generally come longer, and they have longer handles so that you can have more control when you're using the tool by hand. Now, the one I have here is not the classic looking paring chisel, but they do come in many different shapes. Because of the very long bevel angle, these chisels are best for removing really precise amounts of wood. It's important to know that these types of chisels do require a better, higher-end steel to keep the edge sharp, again because of the very low bevel angle. And if I put the 3 chisels side by side, you can see how much difference there is between the bevel of a mortise, bevel edge, and paring chisel. The last chisel to look at is a construction chisel. Now, not everyone separates this type of chisel out from the rest, but because I spent so many years in construction, I feel the need to talk about them separately. Construction chisels generally look a lot different than a good woodworking chisel, and you can see that here with this DeWalt. They do, however, share the same bevel angle as the bevel edge bench chisel, which is 25 degrees. As you can see, this chisel is shorter than the others. It has a bi-material handle not made from wood. It has a big striking cap for the use with a hammer, and the steel is generally a lower grade. Oftentimes these chisels are used for rough construction, demolition, and many other things that they were never designed to do, but that's what makes them so great. They can be used for fine woodworking, however, I don't think they're going to produce a good enough result. Again, they have their place, and that's what makes them so perfect for what they do. Now that we covered the 4 different types of wood chisels, let's look at 3 different ways that the handles can actually be attached to the blade. There are at least 3 ways that the handle gets attached to the blade of the chisel. And the first way is to use a tang. A tang is an extension of the blade, if you will, that extends into the handle, that helps bond the blade with the handle material, making for a very secure connection. The connection is so secure that the handle cannot be removed, especially on a chisel like this. Now this chisel may not be the best example of a tang chisel, but it represents it pretty good. The next connection type utilizes a socket. Both the Mortise Chisel and the bevel chisel here have a socket connection, and you can see that here more when I remove the handle. The handle gets installed into the socket, and because of the nature of the joint, it gets tighter the harder you push or the harder you tap on the handle. To firmly secure the blade, all you have to do is simply tap the handle like this on a bench. To remove it, flip the chisel around and hold the blade, safely of course, away from the sharp edge, and tap the handle to break it free. Now, the only downside to a handle like this is that sometimes it can come loose without you knowing it. So you can pick it up off the bench and you can be carrying it along like this, and all of a sudden the handle comes loose, and 9 times out of 10 it falls on the concrete and destroys your fine sharp edge. The third and best type of connection, in my opinion, is to use a ferrule. This type of connection allows for the handle to be removed just like a socket chisel, but this one, the handle actually gets unscrewed. Once you remove the handle, you can see the extension with the aluminum cap on the end. Then we can remove the ferrule, which completely breaks down the chisel. So why would you want to remove the handle? Well, there's 2 main reasons. The first one being that it makes it easier to sharpen the chisel. The first step to sharpening any chisel is to make sure that the back is perfectly flat. And to do that, you need to be able to easily position a blade flat to your stone, and a big handle could make that more difficult. On the socket chisel, you can see that if I lay it flat on the bench, it lays pretty flat, but the socket itself holds it up a bit. However, if we look at the other chisel, you can see that it lays perfectly flat, making it much easier to set up for the process of flattening. The second reason why someone might want to remove the handle is to make a new one. For example, on this chisel, because it has a ferrule and an aluminum cap, you can make a new handle out of any wood, hard or soft, because you're always hitting the cap and not the wood. Therefore, you can safely make a soft wood handle and not worry about damaging it under heavy use. Let's quickly move on to the last topic, which is the main difference between a cheap chisel and an expensive one. Cheap chisels, for the most part, make their blades out of a lower grade steel, and their tolerances are not as great. And this shows up in 2 places, so let's talk about that now. First, if the tolerances are less than desirable, the flattening process could take a very long time. You can look at it this way: the less work they do at the factory, the more work you're going to have to do at home in the shop. So just know that on bad chisels or on cheaper chisels, that flattening process could take up to 2 hours. The second place where cheap metal and manufacturing processes show up is in a chisel that will not stay sharp. You have to remember that you're really only relying on the very edge of the chisel to do the work. Therefore, if that edge has a problem staying sharp, you'll be at the sharpening stones more than you'll be working on your project. Good quality metal counts more than you know. Moving on, cheaper chisels may feel more clumsy to work with. The balance will be off and something will just feel wrong about the tool. And you may even think that it's you, but it's not. It's the tool. And lastly, cheaper chisels are harder to sharpen simply because of their poor design and because some of the handles cannot be removed. Bottom line, cheaper chisels can be more uncomfortable to use, harder to sharpen, and they don't hold an edge as long, which means they require more maintenance. More expensive chisels, on the other hand, are easier to flatten. They hold an edge a lot longer and they're more comfortable to use. You can also then remove the handle so that you can make a new handle out of whatever material that you want, if that's your thing. Now, better isn't always best, meaning that there are plenty of woodworkers out there that are using cheap or old chisels and their work looks amazing. My main point of running through cheap versus an expensive chisel is to show you how and what makes an expensive chisel different than a cheaper chisel. My recommendation for those who are getting started is to buy a 4-piece bench chisel set. At the lower end, I would recommend Naric's classic bevel edge chisels. Moving up, I would recommend Wood River bevel edge socket chisels. And then getting more expensive, you have the lie-nielsen chisels, and maybe at the top, the IBC. I'll leave a link down below in the notes section to all of these chisels if you'd like to check them out. I hope this video has been helpful for you to distinguish between the different types of chisels that you may need in your shop. Please hit the like button and leave a comment below. It does help our channel get more views and fight the algorithm. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Thank you for watching to the end. I'll see you in the next video.